Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're going to be talking about chastity,
Ooh,
which is, I
interesting.
think, more complex than people realize.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what all these different sources that our listeners sent in, what they have to say about this.
Right, and it's so many different sources.
Yeah.
We have excerpts from Erik Varden's chastity book. We
Yeah.
have ancient philosophers,
Yep.
modern literature, even personal anecdotes.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, reading through all these different sources, it seemed like there was this theme
Okay.
of chastity as integrity.
Hmm.
And it kind of goes beyond the typical
Absolutely.
ideas of chastity.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because a lot of the sources are framing chastity not as a set of rules, but like a path towards something.
Right.
It's like a way of understanding ourselves and how we relate to other people
Yeah.
and how we relate to the world.
Right. And that brings up the question, like, what is chastity really? Like even the word can feel kind of loaded.
Yeah, a little bit intimidating.
Yeah.
So I think breaking it down etymologically can help.
Okay.
So the word chaste comes from the Latin castus,
Yeah.
which has roots in the Greek word katharos, which means pure.
Okay.
But this is where it gets really interesting, is that katharos is also where we get the word catharsis.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that feeling of release
Great.
that we get through like powerful art.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so we're already kind of seeing this connection
Right.
between chastity and this idea of clarity.
Yeah.
This purifying our emotions and our perceptions.
Yeah. And kind of purifying how we
Totally.
view the world.
Yeah. And even Cicero, he was a Roman orator, and he used castus to describe like an open mind free of bias.
Oh.
So he believed that you needed a chaste and pure soul to be able to interpret like signs from the gods.
Oh, wow.
So imagine that same like clarity, but applied to your own life and how you view yourself and other people.
Right. So it's kind of like seeing the world
Yeah,
honestly, authentically.
precisely.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sources talk about how chastity is more about orienting your sexuality towards like a desired end.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily about denying it.
Right.
It's about having a purpose
Yeah.
for it.
Right. And so I think it's like when Aulus Gellius, who was a Roman writer, when he praised Julius Caesar's writing style, he said it was chaste.
Ooh,
And he didn't mean like,
right.
prudish. He meant like pure, uncorrupted, effective.
Yes, like having integrity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a similar connection in the Germanic language families
Mm.
where words related to chastity are also like linked to consciousness, awareness, and the will to live by certain values.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I think, we have to acknowledge that the word chastity can also have these negative
Absolutely.
connotations, especially in today's world.
Totally.
Like in chastity, Erik Varden talks about the Norwegian word kisk,
Oh, yeah.
and it became so associated with this like rigidity
Yeah.
that it basically fell out of use.
People just cringed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile that?
Right. So how do we reconcile these two?
Yeah.
Like this negative perception of chastity
Right.
with this deeper meaning of like wholeness and integrity.
Right.
Well, I think chastity kind of explores that through the relationship between body and soul.
Okay.
So, for example, it tells the story of Saint Olaf, whose body remained incorrupt after death.
Okay.
And so it was seen as evidence of his spiritual integrity, that his physical body reflected the wholeness of his life.
Yeah, and there was also this story about this Carthusian monk whose body also didn't decompose after death.
Oh, wow.
And Dom Edmund, who found the monk, was like, this isn't just a miracle, this is a potential for Christians, like a
Well,
possibility
yeah.
to resist corruption.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it suggests that chastity isn't about neglecting our physical selves, but about, respecting and
Right.
honoring our bodies as part of this greater whole.
Yeah.
And aligning our actions with like our deepest values.
Now, chastity also explores kind of the darker side of desire.
Right.
It talks about the story of David and Bathsheba.
Yeah.
And how David's like unbridled passion led to adultery, violence, and ultimately a curse on his house.
Wow.
Yeah, so it makes you think like, is this a cautionary tale about Eros?
Well, actually, chastity identifies 3 specific aspects of eros that can become really destructive.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the first is erotic intoxication,
Okay.
where passion becomes so consuming that it blinds us to like consequences. Like in Tristan and Isolde, lovers like willingly embrace death.
Wow.
And even Christoph Schlingensief, who's the director of Wagner's operas,
Okay.
he thought that the music was dangerous
Hmm.
because it glorified death over life.
Right. So it's like that intensity
Yeah.
can prevent you from seeing,
Yeah, the bigger picture.
right, the
Yeah.
consequences of what you're doing.
Exactly.
Okay.
The second danger is the dynamic of power and submission.
Mm.
Chastity uses examples like Harold Pinter's play Ashes to Ashes
Okay.
and the film The Night Porter
Yeah. Wow.
to show how desire can be twisted into like abuse and humiliation.
Wow.
Yeah. And in Ashes to Ashes, one of the characters even describes her abuser as someone who adored her.
Oh, wow.
So it's just this like chilling rationalization,
Right.
the power dynamic.
Yeah. It highlights like how important it is to be aware of those power dynamics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially in intimate relationships.
Okay.
And then the third danger is what the book calls pornographic eros,
Mm.
which reduces people to like objects
Hmm.
and ultimately leads to isolation.
So it's about, being mindful of what
Yeah.
kind of eros you're cultivating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this is where this concept of chastity as integrity comes in.
Okay.
It's about choosing actions and behaviors that lead to wholeness and fulfillment rather than
Right.
getting swept away by desires that leave you empty or even hurt.
So, if you're listening right now, what does this make you think about your own experiences with desire?
Totally.
We've been talking about the individual experience of desire,
Yeah.
but I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about how chastity plays out in relationships.
Okay.
So chastity brings up the concept of masculine virginity,
Okay.
and it uses St. Magnus of Orkney as an example.
What's really fascinating about St. Magnus is that he chose celibacy not as a rejection of love,
Right.
but as a way to channel it differently.
Yeah, and there's this description of this incredible cold, precious flame of
Yeah.
love that encompassed all of creation.
Yeah.
It's like instead of focusing that energy on one person,
Yeah.
he expanded it outward.
Totally. And I think that connects to a broader point about love in all its forms.
Okay.
Whether it's romantic, familial, spiritual.
Yeah.
Like true love requires a certain detachment from possessiveness. It's about allowing the other person to be free, to be themselves, even if their choices lead them away from us.
Which brings us to freedom and ascesis, which is another big theme that Erik Varden explores in
Right.
Chastity.
Yeah.
And he argues that true freedom isn't about indulging every impulse,
Right.
but about choosing to follow Christ.
Yeah. Even when it's difficult.
Yeah.
And that's where ascesis comes in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it reminds me of that quote from the Apophthegmata.
Okay.
The measure of the Christian is his or her imitation of Christ.
Ooh, I like that one.
Yeah, we're called to embody Christ's love and compassion, not just in our words, but in our actions.
Absolutely.
Even when it requires effort and sacrifice.
Yeah, but it's so hard
Right.
to live chastely when the world is constantly like bombarding us with temptation.
Yeah.
Chastity acknowledges that this idea of ascesis
Right.
or self-discipline can feel really foreign in a culture that's so focused on instant gratification.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're always told to treat ourselves.
Yeah, live your best life.
Right.
You deserve it.
Yeah, and it's buy more stuff, do
Yeah.
what you want when you want.
Yeah, and it makes it really hard to resist
Right.
those desires, even when we know that they might not be good for us in the long run.
Yeah, and so that's why chastity emphasizes
Okay.
loving chastity.
Ooh, that's good.
Choosing it freely
Yeah.
is joyful.
Not because you have to.
Yeah, not because you're forced, but
Yeah.
because you understand that true ascesis leads you to this deeper connection with yourself and with God,
Right.
and allows you to become the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about denying our humanity.
Yeah.
It's about refining it,
Yeah.
finding a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment.
But then that brings up the question, how do we learn to see differently?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
How do we cultivate that clarity of vision
Yeah.
that helps us make choices
Right.
that lead to genuine happiness?
Yeah.
Well, chastity suggests that contemplative life is super important.
Mm-hmm.
This way of observing the world
Yeah.
with attention and reverence.
It's like that scene in the Odyssey where the crowd in Ithaca looks up at the eagles.
Yeah.
Suddenly this moment of contemplation
Yeah.
reveals a deeper meaning.
Yeah, it's like they see themselves in their world with new eyes.
Right. Fresh eyes.
Yeah, and Richard of St. Victor, who was this medieval theologian, he captured it beautifully.
Okay.
He said, ubi amor, ibi oculus.
Oh, wow.
Where there is love, there is an eye that sees.
Wow, I love that. And
Yeah.
so it's like cultivating that loving gaze,
Yeah.
allowing ourselves to see the world and others with clarity and compassion.
Absolutely.
And chastity highlights kind of the transformative power of those encounters. Like
Yeah.
there's the story of Mary Magdalene pouring her heart out to Jesus.
Yeah.
And Christ didn't judge her or condemn
He
her.
just saw her.
Right. He just saw her in truth.
Yeah.
And that allowed her to be transformed.
And that's such a powerful reminder that true intimacy comes from being known and loved for who you really are.
Right. Not for what you can offer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of powerful women, there's the story of Saint Cecilia.
Yeah.
And in Chastity, it talks about how Saint Therese of Lisieux
Oh, wow.
was inspired by Cecilia's example of like generative chastity. And this idea that chastity can be a source of creativity and inspiration.
Right.
Rather than just restrictions.
Yeah, it's not about saying no.
Right.
It's about opening yourself up to a bigger yes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So I think that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Where we can explore how chastity can actually lead to a more vibrant and fulfilling life.
I'm excited for that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into chastity. And before the break, we were talking about how this concept can actually enhance our ability to see the world more clearly. And even from like a scientific perspective.
Yeah. That part in Chastity about how scientific discovery often involves observing the natural world with a sense of like wonder and reverence really struck me. And it's like that quote by Werner Heisenberg where he talks about nature revealing mathematical forms of great simplicity and beauty. You know, it's those moments of eureka when you suddenly grasp a profound truth about the universe.
Yeah, and that sense of awe and appreciation, that ability to see like beauty and order, something that a chaste mind is like particularly attuned to.
Right.
The book even mentions this French Carthusian monk, Dom Jean-Baptiste Poirion, who found immense joy in contemplating simple things like seashells and lark's eggs. He felt this profound connection to all of creation, like it was all part of this grand tapestry.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It makes me think about how chastity can help us appreciate like the interconnectedness of all things, to see the world with fresh eyes.
Totally.
But like, how do we actually cultivate that kind of mindful awareness in our everyday lives?
Yeah, challenge.
With all the distractions, temptations that we're faced with.
Well, chastity reminds us that the church encourages us to pray for a chaste mind. There's even a line in a weekday lauds hymn that asks for the mind's chastity, to subdue what arrogant flesh lusts for.
So it's a conscious choice, an ongoing effort to become more aware of our thoughts and desires and to kind of steer them in a direction that aligns with our values.
And remember those twin counsels in the Rule of St. Benedict.
Right.
Love chastity and love fasting.
Okay.
They go hand in hand. Fasting, in a sense, is like this physical discipline that helps us develop self-control and detach from earthly pleasures. And that same principle applies to our emotional and spiritual lives.
Right.
Through chastity, we choose to detach from desires that ultimately harm us or leave us unfulfilled, making space for a deeper, more lasting kind of love.
Yeah, and that deeper love can manifest in so many ways.
Yes.
Love for God, love for our neighbor, love for our work, even love for ourselves.
Exactly. And that's why the church acknowledges that the path to chastity looks different for everyone.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all prescription.
Right. It's a journey.
Yeah, the journey of self-discovery and growth.
Yeah, chastity provides some interesting examples of this.
Okay.
There's the story of Paphnutius,
Yeah.
who was an early Christian bishop, and he actually argued against mandatory celibacy for priests.
Wow.
Because he recognized that not everyone is called to that way of life.
And then there was Ida Guris,
Right.
who was a Cistercian nun.
Okay.
And she wrote about how both marriage and celibacy are valid paths to holiness, each with their own challenges and rewards.
It's like we all have this innate desire for love and connection.
Totally.
But how we express that desire, how we channel that energy is something deeply personal.
Yes, it's unique to each individual.
Right.
And it's also important to remember that even within a committed relationship, like a marriage, chastity remains relevant.
Yeah, it's not like
you just get married and then you're done.
Yeah, you've reached the finish line.
Right.
Yeah.
Pope Francis wrote this beautiful letter about St. Joseph,
Okay.
describing him as a most chaste father, because he wasn't possessive or controlling.
Okay.
He loved his family unconditionally and allowed them to be free.
Yeah. And that's a great example of
Yeah.
how chastity can be this way of
Yeah.
loving more fully, more freely,
Yes.
without the need to grasp or control.
It's about surrendering to something bigger than ourselves,
Right.
trusting that letting go of our ego's need for control can actually lead to greater freedom and joy.
And speaking of freedom,
Yes.
I want to circle back to that idea, which
Oh.
is so central to chastity.
Yeah.
And Erik Varden quotes Galatians 5:1.
Okay.
For freedom, Christ has set us free.
Yeah.
But he also emphasizes that this freedom isn't about doing whatever we want,
Right.
but about choosing to follow Christ,
Yeah.
even when it's difficult.
And this is where ascesis becomes really important.
Right.
The book explains that the word ascesis originally referred to the training regimen of athletes in ancient Greece.
Oh, wow. So like athletes
Yeah.
had to undergo rigorous discipline to achieve their goals.
Totally.
We also need a spiritual training.
Yes, exactly. In a spiritual sense, ascesis is about training ourselves to resist temptations,
Right.
cultivate virtues,
Yeah.
and align our lives with God's will.
But it's not about suppressing our humanity
No.
or becoming emotionless.
No, chastity really pushes back against that idea.
Right. We're meant to embrace our physicality and our spirituality.
Totally.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the Desert Fathers,
Okay.
those early Christian monks who lived in the Egyptian desert.
Yeah.
They're often portrayed as these like austere ascetics,
Right.
but they were deeply human, and they even had like a sense of humor about their struggles.
Yeah.
They understood that the path to holiness is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
And it's okay to stumble along the way.
Yeah. There's that story in Chastity about Abbot Antony.
Oh, yeah.
Who is one of the most famous desert fathers.
Yes.
And he was tempted by demons.
Yeah.
Who appeared in like these seductive forms.
Wow. Yeah.
But he didn't give in. He resisted and continued on his path.
Yeah. It's inspiring to see that even the most devout individuals struggled with temptation.
Yeah. It makes it feel more relatable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Desert Fathers also emphasize the importance of community.
Right.
Supporting each other on our spiritual journeys.
We don't have to go it alone.
Exactly.
Yeah, it sounds like it's about finding this delicate balance between discipline and grace.
Totally.
Between effort and surrender. It's about acknowledging our weaknesses and our need for God's help.
Right.
But also trusting that with God's grace, we can overcome any obstacle.
And that brings us to the theme of conversion.
Okay.
Another key aspect of chastity. The book talks about how chastity isn't just like a static state of being.
Right.
It's an ongoing process of transformation.
Right.
It's about allowing God to work in our lives.
Right.
To heal our wounds.
Yeah.
And to make us new.
Like the story of Saint Mary of Egypt.
Oh, yeah.
Who went from living a wild, promiscuous life to becoming a hermit in the desert.
Wow.
Yeah, she spent years repenting for her past sins.
Right.
And ultimately achieved a profound level of holiness.
Yeah, her story is a powerful reminder that no matter how far we've strayed from God, His mercy is always available to us. It's
Right.
never too late to turn back to Him and begin again.
And that process of reorienting our lives towards God can be challenging,
Yeah.
but also incredibly rewarding.
It is.
It's like we're constantly being invited
Yeah.
to shed our old, worn-out ways
Yeah.
and embrace the new life that God offers.
That's a beautiful image.
Yeah,
It speaks to the ultimate goal of chastity, which is union with God.
right.
It's about becoming who we were truly created to be. Fully alive and fully free in God's love.
So how do we take these ancient teachings and apply them
Right.
to the challenges that we face today?
Yeah.
What does it actually look like to live a chaste life
Yeah.
in the 21st century?
Perhaps it starts with recognizing that chastity is not simply about rules and restrictions,
Right.
but about a deeper longing for wholeness and fulfillment. It's about aligning our desires with our true purpose,
Right.
which is to love and be loved.
And that's a journey that each of us has to undertake for ourselves.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer,
Yeah.
magic formula.
It's about self-discovery and growth,
Right.
and it's a journey worth taking.
Yeah.
And we'll continue exploring that journey in part 3, where we'll delve deeper into the generative power of chastity
Okay.
and how it can lead to a more vibrant and fulfilling life.
I'm excited for that.
Me too.
Welcome back to our final exploration of chastity. And we've covered so much ground, from ancient philosophy to modern examples.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. And I think we're really starting to grasp like this deeper meaning of this very complex topic.
Right. And it's like what's been so fascinating for me is how the sources challenge that modern tendency to compartmentalize things.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've seen, chastity isn't just about sexual behavior,
Right.
but it's about this integrated approach to life.
It's about the whole person.
Yeah, encompassing your thoughts, your desires, your actions.
Your relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, how you view the world.
And it's about learning to see differently, as chastity emphasizes.
Totally.
Especially in its discussion of contemplative life.
Yeah.
Observing the world with attention and reverence.
Right.
Like, I keep thinking about that line from the book, if your eye is sound, your whole body will be full of light.
And the book even suggests that a sound eye could be interpreted as a chaste eye, like one that's not clouded by lust or selfish desires.
It's about seeing the world and others with clarity and compassion.
Yes, recognizing that inherent worth
Right.
and dignity of every human being.
Like that story about the sculptor who saw St. Cecilia's incorrupt body.
Oh, yeah.
And he was just so moved by its beauty and purity that he was able to create this remarkably lifelike sculpture, as if her inner sanctity was so radiant that it just permeated her physical form.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And so that brings us to this question of how chastity can be generative, like a source of creativity and inspiration.
Yeah, and Chastity mentions how Saint Therese of Lisieux was drawn to Saint Cecilia's example of generative chastity.
Right.
She saw in Cecilia a life that was lived in harmony with God.
Yeah.
A life that was both beautiful and fruitful.
And it wasn't just about abstaining from sex.
Right.
It was about channeling that energy, that passion, into something greater.
Exactly, something bigger than herself.
It reminds me of that quote by the violinist Yehudi Menuhin.
Okay.
He said, "The most creative artists are those who are able to sublimate their sexual energy into their art."
I like that.
Yeah, but it's not just limited to art. It's like any creative endeavor, whether it's writing, music, building a business, raising a family.
It could be anything.
Right. It's about taking that raw energy, that life force,
Yeah.
and using it to create something meaningful in the world.
It's amazing how chastity can be about so much more than just saying no to certain things.
It's about saying yes to a deeper, more fulfilling way of life.
Yes. And I think it's about aligning our desires with our true purpose.
Right.
Which is to love and be loved.
And that love, that connection, is something that we can find in so many places.
Absolutely.
In our relationship with God, with our family and friends.
Our work, even ourselves.
Right, even within ourselves.
Yeah.
But it all starts with this conscious choice.
Yeah, a decision to strive for wholeness and integrity.
It's a journey.
Yeah, it's not a destination.
We're going to stumble and fall along the way.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But what matters is that we keep getting back up and striving for that ideal, even when it feels out of reach.
And remembering that we're not alone in this journey.
Right.
We have each other.
Yeah.
We have the church.
Right.
And most importantly, we have God's grace.
Right. To guide us.
To sustain us.
As we were talking about St. Cecilia, I couldn't help but think about that fresco of the Last Judgment in her basilica. That image of Christ as the universal judge, looking out over all of humanity with those piercing eyes.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we'll all have to stand before him one day and account for our lives.
It's a sobering thought,
yeah,
but also hopeful, because it reminds us that no matter what we've done, how far we've strayed,
right,
God's mercy is always there.
Yeah, it's never too late to turn back to him.
Yeah, and seek his forgiveness.
So as we conclude our deep dive into chastity, I want to leave you with this question. Adam, where are you? It's a question that echoes throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
A question that God is constantly asking each of us. And maybe, just maybe, the path to true wholeness and freedom lies in honestly answering that question.
That's beautiful.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Until next time.